I've spoken a lot on this channel about the need to be candid on controversial subjects. And as an extension of that, I'm very wary of political correctness. The way it's been used, or the way it's come across over the last sort of 2 decades. Um, and I do think that there is a serious, we take freedom of expression for granted in Western liberal democracies, but when we look at what's been happening on university campuses and elsewhere, it's not absolutely guaranteed. So I've been very candid in my views on that and the need to talk candidly about controversial subjects. So I stand by everything I've said. But I also notice that there is a response from the right, and it's to denigrate what they call snowflakes. Now, you'll notice that although I speak out against political correctness and I dislike deeply the divisiveness of identity politics, I rarely, if ever, use the term snowflakes. And I want to explain why. I do think that there are some people who are overly sensitive, and that's where the pejorative term snowflakes comes from. So I know how it started. And there are certainly people out there who are way too sensitive. And it's more than irritating, it's actually a big problem when legislation is involved, for example, when we think of trans activism, when there is a risk of criminal arrest if someone uses the wrong pronoun, that's clearly absurd. But so I understand the context of that pejorative. Oh, you're a snowflake. I get that. But I don't want to live in a society where people can't have candid debate and raise candid concerns, and where people are threatened with a criminal offence because they've said something that is controversial, whether that be criticism of religion, whether it be something that's politically incorrect. I do not want a society where people are constantly fearing legal repercussions. I think that's very dangerous. It's very Orwellian. And we should all be wary of that. Anyone who genuinely believes in liberal democracy, if you really do believe in that, then you need to be wary about any attempts at legislation. It's not to say that they're all absolutely wrong. I think there are some circumstances, for example, when someone is blatantly promoting violence, for instance. But what I want to touch on here is that I think there is a case for sensitivity in society, sensitivity slash compassion. You know, this can be a very dark world. There's war, there's extreme poverty, there's human rights abuses, there's injustice, there's repression, there's crime. There's all these things that can be very negative and depressing. Then there's more optimistic things too. There's a lot of good people out there. There's a lot of kindness and benevolence in human nature. I'm thinking of Jodie Ann Bickley, the video I made earlier, and there's many other examples. But I do think there is times when sensitivity is not a bad thing. So, for example, if you have a situation whereby, let's say, you're going to a funeral. Now, common sense dictates that you're going to be respectful at the funeral. You're not going to go up to the parents of the deceased or the children of the deceased and say, by the way, this person was an asshole, or I didn't really like this person, but I'm just coming here to put on a front. So there are times in life when we have to kind of be diplomatic. I also think that personally, if someone doesn't want to talk about a particular subject, if I know that makes them uncomfortable, I'm not going to push it. Why? Because there's really no need to. It's different if they've initiated the argument, then they just want to back away. That's different because they should take responsibility for that. But I think sometimes people need to accept that it's not going to go anywhere. Just agree to disagree. You know, I think if you keep pushing it, there are certain things that I think if everybody really thought about it, I think there's very few people that can honestly, hand on heart, say that there is absolutely nothing that would bother them, that would get under their skin. Of course, you get some people that are a lot more confident than others and are very good at hiding it, but most people have had some situation in their life that has been very painful, that has been very stressful, hurtful, caused a great deal of stress and anxiety. And it may well be that they just don't want to be reminded of that situation, or that talking about it is difficult, or that the subject around that is hard for them to talk about. Now, it doesn't give them a right to censor anyone else, but by the same token, other people don't have the right to impose that on them and say, oh, but what's your opinion? Tell me your opinion, and they keep pushing it and pushing it. I think that's wrong. If someone's clearly uncomfortable talking about something, why push it? I'll be honest, there's certain things I'm sensitive about, i.e., I don't particularly invite conversations about because I've got strong views on them. And I mean, there's a lot of subjects I have strong views on, and I'm happy to debate those issues. But there are certain things that have happened in my personal life that I just, maybe one day I'll be ready to discuss them, but at this point, I just know that it'll get to me, and that's just the truth. And I really think that anyone who says, "Oh, I can talk about anything," there's absolutely nothing bothers me, they're either lying or they're being braggadocious. I think most people would have certain subjects that they would get worked up about. And like I say, some more than others, but that's natural. It doesn't mean you're a snowflake. It doesn't mean you're too sensitive. And I think a degree of empathy, or at least just respect, is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. I'll give an example. On the issue of sensitivity, take for example transgender people and pronouns. Now, I happen to believe that biology matters, and as far as I'm concerned, a woman is an adult human female, someone born with uh, female genitalia, and a male with male genitalia. And then there's intersex people, which is a extremely rare biological condition. But if a trans woman wants to be referred to as she, I'm going to respect that, because I know that to not respect that would be hurtful to them, and it would be, I may not understand it, but that doesn't mean I have to be deliberately provocative just for the sake of it. Now, if they said to me, "You have to see me as a woman," that's a different matter, because that's imposing it on me. And this is what people need to understand. There's a world of difference between mutual respect and imposing something. Now, this is not to say that people won't vent their views on things. I'll be quite honest, there's certain subjects that, if people, I mean, I'll give an example. Let's say the subject was crime, and someone was arguing against prison for some knife thug that's just stabbed a random stranger. I'd get pretty heated about that because I've strong views on crime. So that's, opinions can be very powerful. But what I'm driving at is that on personal matters, I think we need to just respect boundaries and respect that sometimes people just don't want to talk about it. And whilst I don't like political correctness, I also believe that some people use it as a cover to just be assholes, basically. Just be as obnoxious as they possibly can. And on the subject of sensitivity, it also covers dark humor. Now, I personally appreciate risque humor. I can see the merits of satire, of dark humor, of gallows humor to an extent. But I also think just because something is called humor doesn't mean it automatically deserves respect. I think too often people are like, oh, have a sense of humor. Well, you can't impose your sense of humor on other people. So, take for example an odious creep like Roy Chubby Brown, who made a joke about the Bradford City disaster. That was a tragedy in which 56 people died. And he was making jokes about that days after it happened. Now, to me, I don't care if you call it politically correct. I think to me that's just the behavior of an asshole, an insensitive, callous asshole. And I think certain stand up comedians have a very nasty bullying streak to them, and they hide behind humor by just being as cruel and as callous as possible. Frankie Boyle's another one who takes pot shots at disabled children. There's risque humor and there's callous humor, and I do see a difference because my thought is it's not that it's offensive to me personally, but what about the victims of those tragedies, i.e., the Bradford City fire? You know, to take cheap shots at something like that takes a pretty degenerate mind, as far as I'm concerned. Um, and it isn't even particularly witty. You know, the issue is not about, well, you don't like that type of humor. I don't like that type of humor, but I don't even think it's particularly clever. It's lazy, actually, because it's a cheap shot. So, to use that as an example, let's say one of the relatives of someone who died in that disaster got very angry at Roy Brown. You know, people can hardly criticize that relative for being angry because it's a totally human response. Let's say someone close to me had died in a horrible tragedy, and some stand-up comedian was making money off it by telling cheap jokes. It would piss me right off. Like really, it would. So it does irritate me when people say, "Oh, just have a sense of humor," and they think that callousness is somehow being rebellious and standing up to PC. It's not. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And I think some of these stand-up comedians are no better than playground bullies. I really do. And I hate bullies. I always have. Um, so it's kind of two extremes. One extreme is predominantly on the regressive left, which is censorious, if that's a real word, you know, prone to censorship. I think I might have just made up a word there, but you know, prone to censorship. You see it particularly in universities these days, and that's highly troubling. Um, that's certainly one extreme when people are being threatened with, you know, getting a criminal record because they've said the wrong thing. That's deeply concerning, and we need to be candid about issues like grooming gangs, about Islamist terrorism, about controversial subjects, honor killings, etc. I've always been very vocal that we need to, human rights comes before, for example, religious sensitivities. It must. But the other extreme is those who have absolutely no values whatsoever. And to them, anything goes. Absolutely anything goes. I mean, I came across a radio DJ the other day. I forget his first name, someone Lycus, Los Angeles based. And his whole pitch is about being really politically incorrect. But he's kind of become a bit of a poster boy for anti-feminists. Now, I'm not a fan of third wave feminism, so you would expect me to endorse someone like this, but no, I don't. Why? Because he's an embarrassment to men. I mean, this guy just the way he talks about women is purely in terms of looks, and the sort of language he uses towards them. He had this thing where women were calling in. He sort of let them call in to express their dissent, but his whole pitch was, "Oh, what age are you? You must be fat. You must be ugly." And it was all very ad hominem attacks. That isn't smart. It isn't clever, and it isn't. Yeah, it's just the narrative of an asshole. There are other ways to confront the hypocrisy of third wave feminism. So I do think there is a place for sensitivity. Being against political correctness, being honest about society's problems, and calling out and raising concerns about the censorship of the regressive left in universities, for instance, and the right to parody, the right to satire, all those things are important. But they can all be done without resorting to bullying tactics, without resorting to callousness. I don't think that's a contradiction. And in this regard, I try to be consistent. People might say it's virtue signaling. Well, it's not. It's just me being consistent. Anyway, that's how I feel about it. There is a case for sensitivity and having a little bit of compassion and a little bit of understanding for how other people feel has its place.